One of the weirdest, let's say, effects that I've seen of this particular election cycle with Sanders running in the race and running off with the race in some respects has to do with the introductory of Bloomberg. Now, when Bloomberg comes into this race, he gives the Democratic Party a ton of cash, $325,000, Democratic National Committee. Tom Perez changes the rules to allow him to get into the debates. Now, these rules were put in place, supposedly, unchangeable, at the very least wouldn't necessarily be changed for any particular individual. But Bloomberg is not just any individual. He is a billionaire. And just like Hillary Clinton had the party submissive back in 2016 when she failed and lost to Donald Trump, but effectively had the party on an allowance, well, a party that is cash-strapped and that is broke will be running against a Republican Party that was raising $100 million in that last quarter. Problem. You have two issues. A, you need to stop Sanders, at least from the standpoint of that was Tom Perez's directive given to him by Bill Clinton. That was the reason why Obama pushed to get Tom Perez in that position in the first place. You need to stop Sanders. Second point, you also need to have some level of ability to push back the elements of the left, but also to potentially fund your election. Meaning Bloomberg allows it to cut both ways. A, he has all sorts of money in the world, so he can buy up all the endorsements. He can pay off all of these members within the context of the party that are running in the various races up and down ballot. He gives you various advantages in the sense of cash. Bloomberg can drop $3 billion, would not know that the money was missing, and fund all sorts of election and all sorts of candidates that run in Bloomberg's image. From the standpoint of a Tom Perez or some of these other libs in the party that are terrified of a Bernie Sanders and wants this flush of cash, he comes across as being an attractive option. Doesn't matter that he's a Republican. Doesn't necessarily matter that he's outright racist. Doesn't necessarily matter that he has all of these sexual harassment claims, even more than Donald Trump. None of this stuff matters. In fact, I would even go so far as to say it doesn't even matter that he'd lose to Donald Trump. Why would he lose to Trump? Because whatever money that Bloomberg has, yes, he could buy off all sorts of officials. He can buy people up and down ballot. He can pay for all of these seats and races, and he can give all of this money to the various charities so they can come out and back him. All of that part's true. But the problem is you shear off an element of your own party in order to put Bloomberg in that position. No lefty is ever going to vote for Bloomberg. And this even goes to the standpoint of people who are pro-Clinton. The weirdest effect that I think I've seen is on the standpoint of the left with Bloomberg getting to the race. All of these Democrats, all of these, the Sam Cedars of the world, the Michael Brooks of the world, those type of people, for the most part, who went out and voter shamed, all of these people, for the most part, for not backing their candidate, Hillary Clinton. Cedar, working on MSNBC, doesn't think that the relationship with MSNBC in any way gets across his politics. And maybe not. It's possible they brought him on because they already knew what he was going to say. But these guys were sheepdogs for the Democratic Party, going so far as attacking anybody, making the argument that least, worse, blue no matter who, is the way to go. And now you come to this weird position in 2020 where these same people who were blue no matter who was making arguments for why voting for Hillary Clinton was clearly the thing to do, and that anything else besides getting on your knees and voting for the person that cheated you was just beyond the pale. And now they're making the argument, but Bloomberg is beyond the pale. So yes, Hillary Clinton, easy choice, but Bloomberg, nope, we're never going to vote for Bloomberg. I don't think they know this, but there is a certain ludicrous positioning, a framing that you have to take to voter shame in the first place, but then to come around to the weird scenario of, all right, Clinton was okay, but Bloomberg is a bridge too far. I kept making the point that blue, no matter who, allows you to put whatever in that particular slot. And what you find is from election to election, especially if you're looking at it over the context of multiple elections, you have a party that slides further and further to the right. And now you've gotten to the point where the person they're trying to put in is an oligarch billionaire that for the most part is just as bad, if not worse, than the Republican that's in office. But yeah, blue no matter who. I hope they look back at their old videos and reflect on how bullshit their arguments were and why those arguments, for the most part, back then, didn't necessarily work in the context of now. But they're not going to do that. They're going to come up with some bullshit reason about why Clinton was perfectly acceptable by Bloomberg is not, missing the point that the subjective reasoning that they're using to come to that conclusion is entirely just out of self-interest. I'm going to show you a clip of Bloomberg. Bloomberg is a disgusting piece of trash. He is making the argument for death panels for all intents and purposes. Ultimately, Bloomberg is making the argument that if you are elderly and you end up with some kind of debilitating disease, let's say cancer, then you should just die. That this notion of getting medical treatment, we as a society can't afford it. This is the 8th richest man on the planet, if I'm not mistaken, making the argument that we cannot afford to treat our elderly once they get to the point that I suppose we can't milk them for whatever skills they have. But once they get to a point of advanced years, the notion that we should spend money ensuring that they are comfortable, that they are not necessarily in undue pain, and at the very least do everything that we could to extend their life and quality of life. That should be avoided, and we should not, as a society, do that. That's the quantity that Bloomberg is, and that is the quantity that many liberals have come to the conclusion that this is our guy. Joanne Reed going so far as to say he's a Republican that can fight like a Republican, as if that's the thing that you want to push and work for. Bloomberg, pushing for death panels. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support. PayPal, Patreon. This video is not going to be long. And to be honest, there are like 20 of these videos of Bloomberg saying disgusting things either to women, disgusting things in the context of race, meaning African Americans, or disgusting things in the context of just the poor, the elderly, the sick, etc., etc., etc. Bloomberg is effectively running a campaign like Trump ran. That he can run all of these ads, he can run these videos with one difference. That Trump, at the very least, would engage to some degree in policy. You may not like the policy, but these were policies. We're going to build a wall. Okay, that's a policy. That's a stupid one, but that's a policy. He didn't necessarily say anything about Space Force, but this notion of America first, globalism, those type of things, those indeed are policies. And the American first thing, I would make the point, scored more points than anything Clinton was pushing, because the only thing Clinton was talking about was Donald Trump. In this very specific case, Bloomberg is out. He's having a conversation with, I think these are Jewish people. And listen to what he's saying in the context of healthcare and in the context of us as a society having some level of moral responsibility to take care of each other, especially when they've gotten to the point of advanced years that they come down with some kind of illness. Bloomberg pushing for death panels.
Things they can't fix right away. You know, if you're bleeding, they'll stop the bleeding. If you need an X-ray, you're going to have to wait. That's just, and all of these costs keep going up. Nobody wants to pay any more money. And at the rate we're going, healthcare is going to bankrupt us. So not only do we have a problem, it's going to bankrupt us. And we've got to sit here and say which things we're going to do and which things we're not. Nobody wants to do that. You know, if you show up with prostate cancer and you're 95 years old, we should say, go and enjoy, have a nice career, lead a long life. There's no cure, and you can't do anything. If you're a young person, we should do something about it. Society's not willing to do that yet. So we're going to bankrupt us, and we're not looking at what things they...
This is a billionaire saying that healthcare is going to bankrupt us. Think about how weird that is. 8th richest man on the planet. The guy that is so rich, he's running a vanity campaign where he's spending $350, if I'm not mistaken, to $500 million on ads and on buying other political leaders and other politicians throughout the country. And this billionaire, 8th richest man, I believe it's the 8th, running a vanity project where he's going to spend probably around $1 billion just in the primary, is telling people that we as a society can't take care of the elderly when they come down with a particular illness or disease that Bloomberg considers to be incurable. Even if it's incurable, the notion that you say, hey, you go have a nice life, as opposed to trying to give some care and assistance to cut down on, at the very least, this notion of pain and injury. The notion that Bloomberg, as rich as he is, it's like, we can't afford it, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. What age does Bloomberg want to stop cut-off treatment? Like, what age does Bloomberg want to tell people, yeah, man, we can't treat you at this age because you've hit, what, 70? 65? What's the age that Bloomberg wants to start denying medical treatment and medical care to other American citizens? At what age is it too expensive to ensure that a person has a particular quality of life, or, if necessary, quality of death? Please tell me you at the very least understand how disgusting this is. It's one thing if a gentleman goes in fact, there is no one thing or the other with that. You go in and any family member, meaning anybody, if it was your mom, cousin, sister, wife, whatever, you would want them to use all powers at their disposal to try to ensure that that person, if not survive, because none of us make it out alive, at the very least, it's not an undue pain, undue injury, undue stress, and that you do what you can to make the individual comfortable as they pass. But the notion that you abandon care because they get to an age that Bloomberg doesn't find worthy of maintaining and supporting life, that's disgusting. That is utterly disgusting. But this is the guy that libs are now jumping on board with. They're in for Bloomberg. They're all in for Bloomberg now. I've never even heard a Republican say that. Think about that. I've never even heard a Republican say that. That at a certain age, you should deny care. And this is not me putting words in his mouth. Listen to him again. He's very clear. If a person gets ill, and let's say they're in their 90s, we need to say, go have a nice life. But the society is not at a point where it would tell somebody who's sick to go fuck themselves, so we're just going to go bankrupt.
You can't fix right away. If you're bleeding, they'll stop the bleeding. If you need an X-ray, you're going to have to wait. That's just, and all of these costs keep going up. Nobody wants to pay any more money. And at the rate we're going, healthcare...
It's not nobody. It's you. Let's be clear. It's not nobody. It's you. It's people like you that don't want to pay more money. You realize that if Bernie Sanders had implemented his tax plan, let's say going back to, I don't know, when Obama ran, Bloomberg would have like $11 billion as opposed to what, $50 or $60 billion. Meaning the revenue that you could raise off of people like Bloomberg with the ungodly sum of money that he has in his bank account could actually go towards paying and covering things like healthcare. The healthcare that he's saying that we as a society can't afford. Ultimately, he's talking about himself. If you gave people the option of Medicare for all, we've seen the level of support that Medicare for all has. It has that level of support because people realize that we are being hosed, screwed over by insurance companies who we are paying, which is for all intents and purposes a tax that effectively makes someone else rich on one count, but also to deny us care in the pursuit of making that other person rich. We as a collective, as a society, can come together and say, there's a better way to do this. And yeah, I would imagine that people will be willing to put in a payroll tax if A, they can get the money back that they're putting out, meaning their expenses drop. And also the notion that they can get healthcare, drug costs, and everything else, if those things get dramatically reduced, people would be on board for it. The catch is, people like Mike aren't on board for it because people like Mike know they would have to pay more. This argument is entirely for Mike and elements of his class. That is not as a totality of the United States. What he's talking about here, this needs to be extremely understood, just relates to people of his class. People of his class would prefer the elderly just die as opposed to actually paying more to ensure that we can give them a good quality of life at the end of their life.
It was going to bankrupt us. So not only do we have a problem, it's going to bankrupt us. And we've got to sit here and say which things we're going to do and which things we're not. Nobody wants to do that. You know, if you show up with prostate cancer and you're 95 years old, we should say, go and enjoy, have a nice career, lead a long life. There's no cure, and you can't do anything. If you're a young person, we should do something about it. Society's not willing to do that yet. So so we're gonna bankrupt us, and we're not looking at what things.
Here's a question. If there's no cure, then why should we even treat the person who's younger? Like, if you're telling me that there is no cure for this, and that, for the most part, with this disease, you can abandon all hope, then if the person was 29, or if that person was 76, what does it matter? Why should we waste resources protecting somebody or trying to treat somebody if there is no cure for the disease? I'm making the point that the logic doesn't necessarily follow suit. If you could treat the person who's 29, what's the harm in treating the person who's 70 or 80 or 90? Bloomberg's issue is issues of cost, but those, again, are issues of allocating resources to the areas where we need to allocate resources. The notion that you would make the argument as a billionaire that we cannot afford to cover our society in the sense of health. I'm sorry, it's really disturbing. But I think it gives you the quantity of person who Bloomberg is in this race. I'll leave it here. This video is disturbing. But the fact is, there are multiple videos like this that are disturbing, outright disturbing, in the things that Bloomberg has said and the things and the policies that Bloomberg has pushed for. Of all of them, though, the callousness to turn around and say, yeah, some Americans should just die. They are not worthy of care. And at a certain age, I, Bloomberg, can subjectively determine at which age we should stop giving medical assistance. The new liberal hero, Bloomberg. Welcome to the resistance. Like, share, subscribe.